What if every alien encounter reported in 2025 government data isn't extraterrestrial contact, but something far more unsettling? New York alone recorded 66 UAP sightings in the first half of 2025, according to the National UFO Reporting Center. Dr. Michael Masters, a biological anthropologist, experienced impossible flight maneuvers and mind-reading episodes that led him to a revolutionary conclusion: these beings are us from the future. Dozens of pilots and scientists in 2025 reported unexplained mind-to-mind communication, directly paralleling Masters' experience. His research reveals patterns suggesting not one, but multiple future human timelines are actively observing our present. The anatomical match between reported entities and evolved human cranial development will reshape everything you thought you knew about this phenomenon. For Masters, it all started with a compulsion he couldn't ignore on a cold Montana night. The Montana professor's impossible encounter. Dr. Michael Masters stood in his Montana backyard, feeling something he couldn't explain. The compulsion hit him without warning, a pull that drew him outside despite having no logical reason to leave his house. This wasn't curiosity or restlessness. Something demanded his presence in that exact spot at that precise moment. 5 lights hung motionless in the sky above him, positioned as if they knew he would emerge from his house at that moment. The arrangement struck him as deliberate, calculated. These lights had been expecting him. Masters watched them maintain their formation for several minutes, and without any apparent signal or pattern, they accelerated away at impossible speeds. No gradual departure, no conventional flight path. They vanished into the distance faster than any known technology could move. The encounter lasted maybe 10 minutes total, but those 10 minutes destroyed everything Masters thought he understood about reality. His timing wasn't unique. The National UFO Reporting Center documented 396 sightings in spring 2024, the highest second quarter on record. Something unprecedented was happening across the country, and Masters had become part of it. Professor of biological anthropology at Montana Tech had spent his career studying human evolution through a scientific lens. His PhD focused on craniofacial morphology and hominin skull growth, examining how human skulls developed over millennia, how brain capacity expanded, how our species adapted and changed through time. This background in cranial evolution would become crucial to his later theories, but that night in his backyard, it only made the experience more unsettling. His scientific training told him what he witnessed shouldn't exist. Masters had dedicated years to understanding human development patterns. He knew how species evolved, how technology advanced, how civilizations progressed. His academic work focused on measurable, observable changes in human biology over vast timescales. The methodical nature of his research made him particularly sensitive to patterns others might miss. When he looked at those 5 lights, his trained eye recognized intentional behavior rather than random phenomena. The psychological impact hit him gradually over the following days. This wasn't a distant sighting or grainy video footage. He had witnessed something that operated outside known physics, something that seemed aware of his presence. The lights hadn't appeared randomly. They positioned themselves where he could see them clearly, waited for him to observe them, then departed once their message was delivered. The intelligence behind the encounter was undeniable. His expertise in human cranial development became a lens through which he began analyzing what he had experienced. If these weren't conventional aircraft, what were they? If the intelligence behind them wasn't terrestrial, where did it originate? His background studying how human skulls evolved, how brain capacity increased over thousands of years, planted seeds of an unconventional hypothesis. What if evolution continued far beyond current human forms? The materialist worldview that had guided his academic career began cracking that night. Masters had built his professional reputation on observable, measurable scientific data. He studied physical evidence, fossil records, genetic markers. The supernatural had no place in his work or personal beliefs, yet 5 lights had demonstrated technology and awareness that challenged every assumption about what was possible. Sleep became difficult in the weeks following the encounter. Masters found himself questioning not just what he had seen, but why he had been chosen to see it. The compulsion that drew him outside felt targeted, personal. Random UFO sightings happened to people everywhere, but this felt different. The timing, the positioning, the behavior of the lights suggested he had been specifically selected for this experience. His training in biological anthropology provided a framework for understanding evolutionary timelines that most people lacked. He knew how long significant changes took in human development. 50,000 years could produce dramatic alterations in skull shape, brain capacity, even basic physical appearance. His expertise allowed him to consider possibilities that seemed impossible to others without his background. The encounter planted questions that conventional explanations couldn't address. Why had he felt compelled to go outside at that exact moment? How had the lights known he would be there? What kind of intelligence could predict human behavior with such precision? His scientific mind demanded answers, but traditional science offered none that satisfied the evidence he had witnessed. Months passed before the next phase began. Masters tried returning to his normal routine, focusing on his teaching and research. The Montana encounter remained vivid in his memory, but he attempted to compartmentalize it as an unexplained anomaly. His rational mind insisted there had to be conventional explanations he simply hadn't discovered yet. The lights had demonstrated technology that suggested advanced intelligence, but Masters began wondering if advanced necessarily meant alien. His background studying human evolution opened a different possibility. What if the intelligence was human, just from a different point in our timeline? What if those lights represented not visitors from space, but visitors from time? This seed of an idea grew stronger as he analyzed the encounter's characteristics. The beings behind those lights seemed to understand human psychology perfectly. They knew exactly how to get his attention, exactly when he would be receptive to the experience. This suggested intimate familiarity with human nature rather than the cautious approach expected from truly alien intelligence. His expertise in cranial development patterns became increasingly relevant as he considered this possibility. The evolutionary trajectory of human skulls showed consistent trends toward larger brain capacity, more refined features, altered proportions. Extrapolating these trends forward tens of thousands of years produced beings that might look quite different from modern humans, yet still recognizably human in origin. The encounter's timing felt significant in other ways. Why now in 2021 had this happened to him? His research into human evolution had reached certain conclusions about our species' development patterns. Had he been selected because his expertise made him uniquely qualified to understand what he was witnessing? The precision of the timing suggested careful planning rather than coincidental contact. Masters realized the backyard encounter was establishing contact rather than concluding it. The lights had introduced themselves, demonstrated their capabilities, and confirmed their awareness of him specifically. This felt like an opening move in a longer game, not a random flyby. Something had invested considerable effort in getting his attention, which suggested more interactions would follow. The psychological preparation aspect became clearer in retrospect. The encounter had shattered his materialist assumptions gradually rather than catastrophically. It introduced impossible elements in measured doses, allowing his worldview to expand rather than collapse entirely. This careful approach suggested beings who understood human psychology intimately, who knew exactly how much reality alteration a rational mind could absorb at once. The 5 lights had been waiting for him that night, and Masters began to suspect they would return when he was ready for the next phase of contact. His background in human evolution had prepared him to recognize patterns others might miss, and those patterns were pointing towards something far stranger than alien visitation. They suggested he was about to meet his own descendants. What he didn't expect was how the next contact would arrive. Not through dramatic sky displays or compulsive midnight wanderings, but through something as mundane as artificial light in his neighbor's yard. When thoughts become conversations. The neighbor's security light became the gateway to something Masters had never experienced before. He found himself staring at the bright fixture, thinking it was just another ordinary evening. He had stepped outside for fresh air, expecting nothing more than a few minutes of quiet before heading back inside. The light cast its usual harsh glow across the adjacent property, the same illumination he had seen countless times before. Then something shifted. The quality of the light seemed to change, though he couldn't identify exactly how. It wasn't brighter or dimmer, but somehow more present, more focused. Masters felt his attention drawn to it in a way that seemed beyond his conscious control. He found himself standing there longer than intended, studying this familiar fixture as if seeing it for the first time. Thoughts appeared in his mind that weren't his own. Masters realized he was engaged in a conversation, yet no words had been spoken aloud. The communication felt as natural as talking to another person, except the exchange was happening entirely within his consciousness. The voice was distinct from his internal monologue in tone and perspective. The entities demonstrated knowledge of his private thoughts that startled him. They addressed concerns he hadn't shared with anyone, discussing his internal mental processes as if they had been monitoring his consciousness for weeks. His worries about upcoming conferences, his research anxieties, his family responsibilities, all of these private matters were acknowledged and discussed with impossible specificity. The conversation revealed even deeper awareness of his work. They seemed familiar with his academic projects, his theories about human evolution, his growing interest in unexplained phenomena. The entities discussed his published papers, his ongoing studies, even his unpublished thoughts about where his research might lead. This wasn't general knowledge someone could acquire through internet searches or public records. Their reassurances felt tailored specifically to his personality and psychological needs. They didn't offer generic comfort or vague platitudes. Instead, they addressed his concerns with precision that suggested intimate familiarity with how his mind worked. The communication style matched his own thought patterns while introducing perspectives he wouldn't have considered on his own. Masters found himself discussing future plans and professional decisions in ways that felt completely natural despite the impossible circumstances. The entities seemed interested in his academic trajectory, his potential contributions to understanding human evolution, his role in bridging scientific and unexplained phenomena. They encouraged him to continue his research despite growing skepticism from colleagues about his interest in UFO-related topics. The conversation's duration was difficult to measure. Time seemed fluid during the exchange, with complex ideas transmitted rapidly while emotional reassurance unfolded more gradually. Masters felt information flowing into his mind faster than normal thinking would allow, yet he comprehended everything being communicated. The speed of the exchange suggested capabilities beyond normal human consciousness. When the telepathic interaction concluded, Masters found himself alone again, staring at the security light that now appeared completely ordinary. The shift back to normal perception was jarring. He questioned whether anything had actually happened, or if he had experienced some form of elaborate mental episode while standing in his yard. The next morning brought immediate rationalization. Masters applied his scientific training to explain away the experience. Stress from work, fatigue from recent travel, subconscious processing of personal concerns, all seemed like reasonable explanations for what had felt like telepathic communication. His rational mind insisted on conventional interpretations despite the vivid nature of the experience. This pattern of telepathic contact echoes throughout recorded UFO encounters. Contactees across different cultures and time periods have reported similar direct mind-to-mind communication with non-human intelligences. The consistency of these reports, despite their cultural and temporal separation, suggests a phenomenon that transcends individual psychology or cultural influence. Light serves as a recurring medium in these communications. Masters' experience with the security light parallels numerous other accounts where artificial or natural light sources become focal points for telepathic exchange. The electromagnetic properties of light may provide a mechanism for consciousness-based communication that science doesn't yet understand. The question of reality versus psychological phenomenon becomes central to evaluating such experiences. Masters possessed no prior belief in telepathy or psychic phenomena. His materialist worldview made him an unlikely candidate for imaginary supernatural experiences. Yet the specificity and personal nature of the communication challenged his assumptions about what consciousness could accomplish. The entity's knowledge of his private thoughts suggested capabilities that extended beyond normal perception. They accessed information he hadn't shared with anyone, demonstrating awareness of his internal mental processes. This level of intimate knowledge implied either advanced technology for reading minds or beings who existed in temporal positions that allowed them to observe his entire timeline. Weeks passed before Masters fully accepted that something genuinely anomalous had occurred. The details remained vivid while normal memories from that period faded. The consistency of his recollections, combined with the accurate insights the entities had provided about his concerns, gradually convinced him the experience was real rather than imagined. The telepathic ability that emerged from this encounter would prove to be just the beginning. Masters discovered he could now sometimes sense thoughts from others, particularly during emotionally charged situations. This new capability developed gradually, manifesting as enhanced intuition about people's unspoken concerns and motivations. Some experiencers in 2025 have described synchronized group behavior under certain UAP encounters, suggesting these entities can influence multiple individuals simultaneously. Masters would later witness this phenomenon firsthand when 3 women were compelled to leave a balcony at the exact same moment during his most significant encounter. The security light conversation established a template for future interactions. The entities had demonstrated their ability to communicate directly with his consciousness while providing reassurance about his personal and professional anxieties. This initial telepathic contact prepared him for more complex exchanges that would follow, though Masters had no idea how dramatically those future encounters would unfold. The beings had introduced themselves through telepathy, establishing a communication channel that would become their preferred method of interaction. What Masters didn't realize was that this conversation would be referenced publicly by a complete stranger at his next conference appearance, confirming that every word had been monitored and recorded by intelligences preparing for a much more direct confrontation. The conference intervention that changed everything. Masters arrived at the International UFO Congress in Mesa, Arizona that fall of 2022 carrying a secret burden. The Montana encounter had left him questioning everything. The telepathic exchange had shattered his materialist worldview, and the academic ridicule was mounting. He was mentally preparing to abandon UFO research entirely. The conference would be his final presentation before walking away from a field that had consumed his thoughts for months, but offered nothing but professional isolation in return. The exhaustion ran deeper than physical fatigue. Masters had spent countless hours analyzing his experiences, trying to reconcile impossible events with his scientific training. His colleagues at Montana Tech were already questioning his academic focus. Students whispered about their professor's strange new interests. The weight of maintaining credibility while pursuing research that defied conventional explanation had worn him down completely. Heidi approached him during the conference with what seemed like a casual invitation. She suggested they go up to the VIP room for a quieter environment, away from the crowded main areas. Masters saw nothing unusual in her request. Conference attendees often sought quieter spaces for conversations. The invitation felt perfectly normal, just colleagues finding a better location to continue their discussion about his presentation. The VIP room offered a balcony with outdoor seating, providing privacy from the busy conference floor below. Masters settled into a chair, expecting nothing more than continued conversation about his research. The setting felt relaxed, informal. Other conference attendees moved in and out of the space. Nothing suggested this location would become the site of the most extraordinary encounter of his life. A complete stranger emerged from the room and approached their seating area. Masters had never seen this person before at the conference or anywhere else. The man moved with purpose, carrying a chair directly toward where Masters sat. Without introduction or explanation, he positioned his chair immediately in front of Masters, so close their knees were nearly touching. The proximity was uncomfortable, violating normal social boundaries. The stranger's opening words hit Masters like a physical blow. "We know you've been thinking about quitting lately, and we prefer you not do that." The statement was delivered matter-of-factly, without emotion or dramatic emphasis, yet the content sent waves of terror through Masters' mind. He had told absolutely no one about his decision to abandon UFO research. The thought had remained entirely private, discussed with no colleagues, friends, or family members. Masters stared at this unknown person who had just articulated his most private decision. The impossibility of the situation created immediate psychological distress. How could a complete stranger know thoughts he had shared with no one? The rational part of his mind searched desperately for conventional explanations, while his intuition recognized something far more complex was occurring. The stranger's physical appearance began shifting during their interaction. His eyes seemed different, more intense, as if another consciousness was looking through them. The facial expressions didn't match normal human communication patterns. Masters felt he was speaking with someone who was present but not fully controlling the conversation. The man seemed to be serving as a conduit for intelligence that originated elsewhere. The communication transitioned from verbal to telepathic without warning. Masters realized they were no longer moving their mouths, yet the conversation continued with perfect clarity. The shift felt natural despite being impossible according to his understanding of human communication. Thoughts flowed between them as easily as spoken words had moments before, creating an exchange that bypassed normal sensory channels entirely. The presence of other people on the balcony added another layer of strangeness to the encounter. Masters was acutely aware that witnesses surrounded them, yet the telepathic communication continued without interference. The observers seemed to notice the interaction but couldn't quite process what they were seeing. Their expressions suggested confusion, as if their minds were filtering out aspects of the encounter they couldn't comprehend. 3 women wandered onto the balcony at one point during the exchange. They appeared to be normal conference attendees, perhaps seeking fresh air or a quieter conversation space. Masters watched them approach the seating area where he sat face-to-face with the stranger. Nothing about their arrival seemed planned or coordinated. They moved naturally, as any conference attendees might. The stranger turned toward the 3 women without breaking his telepathic connection with Masters. His request was simple and direct. "Can you close the door?" The women responded immediately and in perfect unison. All 3 turned simultaneously, moved back inside, and closed the door behind them. Their synchronized movement was unnatural, suggesting external control rather than individual decision-making. Masters observed this coordinated departure with growing unease. The women's behavior violated normal human interaction patterns. People don't typically respond to strangers' requests with such immediate compliance. Their simultaneous movement suggested they were responding to direction that transcended normal social communication. Something had compelled their departure with precision that seemed impossible. The balcony remained empty for the duration of the encounter following the women's departure. No other conference attendees approached the space, despite the ongoing activity throughout the rest of the facility. The isolation felt artificially maintained, as if the area had been designated off-limits through means masters couldn't understand. The privacy allowed the interaction to continue without further interruption. The stranger's demeanor suggested the encounter was approaching its primary purpose. His communication indicated they had been preparing masters for something more significant than conversation. The telepathic exchange had been establishing trust and rapport before moving to the main objective. Masters sensed they were building toward a request that would require his conscious consent and participation. The entities speaking through the stranger explained their identity connection to Master's previous experiences. "Once you know who we are, you'll know how we know that." This statement referenced his private thoughts about quitting while suggesting a broader context for all his unusual encounters. The same intelligences behind his Montana sighting and telepathic yard experience were now communicating directly through a human intermediary. The implications of this revelation were staggering. Masters was dealing with entities capable of orchestrating encounters across time and location. They could influence human behavior, control perception, and access private thoughts. The conference intervention demonstrated planning and coordination that suggested intelligence far beyond normal human capabilities, operating through carefully selected human conduits. The stranger's eyes continued displaying characteristics that seemed non-human in origin. Masters felt he was communicating with consciousness that existed beyond the physical person sitting across from him. The human body served as a temporary interface for intelligence that originated elsewhere, whether from another dimension, time period, or level of reality entirely. The setup was complete for what would become the most invasive aspect of the entire encounter. The entities had isolated Masters from other conference attendees, established telepathic communication, and demonstrated their control over human behavior and perception. They had confirmed their connection to his previous experiences, while revealing their ability to operate through human intermediaries. Now they were ready to make a request that would cross boundaries Masters had never imagined possible. The download that defied reality. The entities made their request with unexpected politeness. They asked for permission to implant 3 specific pieces of information directly into Master's mind. The tone remained conversational, almost casual, despite the unprecedented nature of what they were proposing. They weren't demanding or commanding. Instead, they presented the procedure as something requiring his explicit consent, treating him as a willing participant rather than a helpless subject. The explanation of the process was remarkably detailed and precise. The entities told Masters exactly what would happen during the information transfer. His eyes would remain open throughout the entire procedure, but his vision would go completely black from top to bottom. He would lose all visual input despite his eyes functioning normally. Then he would begin to perceive information flowing into his consciousness in ways he had never experienced before. Masters faced a decision that no amount of academic training could have prepared him for. Accept a procedure that defied everything he understood about consciousness and reality, or refuse and potentially miss an opportunity to understand the entities who had been contacting him for months. His scientific background demanded skepticism, yet his recent experiences had already shattered his materialist assumptions about what was possible. The trust factor played a crucial role in his decision-making process. The entities had demonstrated knowledge of his private thoughts and concerns during previous interactions. They had shown ability to orchestrate complex encounters involving multiple people and locations. Despite the impossibility of what they were requesting, they had established a pattern of benevolent contact rather than threatening behavior. Masters gave his consent to the procedure. The moment he agreed, the predicted sequence began exactly as described. His eyes remained open and functioning, yet his visual field went completely black. The transition wasn't gradual like closing his eyes or dimming lights. Instead, his sight simply ceased while his eyes continued operating normally. The sensation was unlike anything in human experience. Information began flooding his consciousness with overwhelming intensity. His mind was receiving and storing data at rates that seemed impossible for human consciousness. The volume and speed of information transfer created an experience that felt almost violent in its intensity. Heidi monitored the entire process from her position nearby. Throughout the information download, she repeatedly asked Masters if he was receiving the data being transmitted. Her questions served as checkpoints, confirming that the transfer was proceeding as intended. Her involvement suggested she had prior knowledge of the procedure and was serving as an assistant or observer rather than an innocent bystander. The content of the information remained beyond Master's conscious access even as it flowed into his mind. He could sense massive amounts of data being stored in his consciousness, yet he couldn't examine or understand what was being implanted. The information existed in his mind, but remained locked away from his normal thinking processes. The entities were creating a storage system that bypassed his conscious awareness entirely. The physical effects of the procedure became apparent immediately after completion. Master's head felt impossibly heavy, as if the weight of his skull had increased dramatically. The sensation wasn't pain exactly, but rather an overwhelming heaviness that made normal movement extremely difficult. Walking through the crowded conference became a surreal challenge. Masters moved like someone in a trance, barely able to navigate through the groups of people. Conference attendees surrounded him, engaged in normal conversations and activities, yet he felt completely disconnected from the ordinary reality they occupied. His movements were mechanical, automatic, requiring conscious effort for actions that should have been natural. The return to his hotel room brought no immediate relief. Masters collapsed into bed and slept for 12 straight hours, far longer than normal for him. The sleep wasn't restful, but rather seemed necessary for his system to process what had occurred. His body appeared to be recovering from a procedure that had fundamentally altered his neurological functioning. Waking brought an unexpected emotional response. Masters found himself crying uncontrollably without understanding why. The tears came in waves, lasting for extended periods before subsiding. Many experiencers report similar post-contact emotional release, suggesting the profound psychological impact of such encounters. The crying wasn't sadness exactly, but rather an overwhelming response to something beyond his conscious comprehension. The implications of storing information beyond conscious access raised disturbing questions about the nature of human consciousness and memory. If data could be implanted in his mind without his awareness, what other information might be stored there? The procedure suggested that human consciousness operated on multiple levels, with storage systems that existed outside normal awareness and control. Masters retained conscious access to only one fragment from the entire download. A single image remained available to his normal thinking processes, a brown building. The structure appeared ordinary, unremarkable in its architecture or setting. Yet this one image had somehow escaped the blocking mechanism that kept the rest of the information locked away from his consciousness. The fragmentary nature of his accessible memory suggested the information had been stored in encoded or compartmentalized form. Perhaps the brown building served as a key or trigger for accessing larger portions of the downloaded data under specific circumstances. The entities might have designed the storage system to release information gradually or in response to particular conditions. The selective accessibility of downloaded information indicated sophisticated control over Master's consciousness. The entities had demonstrated ability to implant vast amounts of data while determining precisely what he could and couldn't access afterward. This level of control over human memory and awareness suggested technology or capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding. The procedure had fundamentally altered Master's relationship with his own mind. He now carried information he couldn't examine, thoughts he couldn't think, and knowledge he couldn't access through normal mental processes. His consciousness had become a storage device for entities whose agenda remained largely mysterious. The download represented a form of partnership he hadn't fully understood when he gave his consent. The brown building image haunted Masters in the following weeks. He found himself studying the mental picture, searching for clues about its significance or location. The structure seemed familiar yet unidentifiable, as if it existed at the edge of recognition without revealing its true meaning. The single accessible fragment tantalized him with hints about the vast information repository now stored beyond his conscious reach. The conference download established a new phase in Master's relationship with the entities. They had moved beyond simple communication to actual modification of his consciousness. The procedure demonstrated their ability to alter human awareness in ways that challenged fundamental assumptions about free will, memory, and the nature of individual identity. What Masters didn't realize was that this intervention would trigger changes in his basic physiology that would manifest in the coming weeks. The ripple effects of contact. Masters discovered something had fundamentally changed in his physiology during the weeks following the conference download. His sleep patterns shifted to something he had never experienced before in his adult life. Every morning, his eyes opened at precisely the same time without any alarm clock or external stimulus. This wasn't the gradual awakening most people experience, but rather an instant transition from deep sleep to full consciousness at an exact moment each day. The consistency of this new awakening pattern defied his understanding of normal circadian rhythms. Masters had always been someone who needed an alarm clock, someone who struggled with early mornings and irregular sleep schedules. Yet now his body operated with mechanical precision, as if an internal timer had been installed and calibrated to wake him at the optimal moment for some purpose he didn't yet understand. The timing of these awakenings aligned perfectly with Brahma Muhurta, the pre-dawn period considered sacred in various spiritual traditions. This window, occurring roughly between 3:30 and 5:30 a.m., represents the time when the boundary between sleep and waking consciousness becomes most permeable. Masters found himself naturally awakening during these hours, his mind immediately clear and alert despite the early time. Time began behaving strangely around Masters in ways that witnesses could verify. During a trip to New York, he entered a bathroom at a busy bar and emerged to find the establishment completely empty and closed. The bartender was gone, the lights were dimmed, and chairs were stacked on tables. According to his perception, he had spent maybe 5 minutes in the bathroom. According to objective reality, hours had passed without his awareness. These time slips mirror documented cases in 2024 NUFORC records where experiencers reported similar missing time episodes with witnesses present. These temporal anomalies occurred repeatedly with other people present to document them. Masters would enter a room or space for what felt like minutes, only to discover that significant time had elapsed in the external world. The witnesses confirmed that he had been gone for far longer than seemed possible, yet Masters retained no memory of the missing hours or what had occurred during them. The controlled nature of these time slips suggested they weren't random glitches in his perception. The episodes seemed to occur during moments when he was alone or separated from others, as if privacy was required for whatever was happening during the missing hours. Masters began to suspect these incidents served specific purposes related to his ongoing contact experiences. A new capability emerged that Masters could activate intentionally. He discovered he could leave his body at will, experiencing consciousness from locations outside his physical form. This out-of-body ability hadn't existed before the conference encounter. Previously, such experiences would have been impossible for someone with his materialist background and scientific training. The out-of-body experiences felt completely natural once they began occurring. Masters could shift his consciousness to observe his physical body from external vantage points or explore locations beyond his immediate environment. The ability required no special preparation or meditation techniques. He simply focused his intention and found his awareness separating from his physical form. His wife became an unwitting witness to the most dramatic manifestation of his altered state. She discovered Masters sitting upright in bed in the middle of the night, engaged in an animated argument with entities only he could perceive. His side of the conversation was clearly audible, responding to unheard voices with obvious frustration and disagreement about topics she couldn't identify. The argument continued for several minutes while Masters remained apparently asleep yet fully engaged in heated dialogue. His wife observed him gesturing, raising his voice, and responding to specific statements from his invisible conversation partners. The interaction was clearly bilateral, with Masters reacting to information and arguments being presented to him by the unseen entities. When she attempted to wake him, Masters showed no awareness of her presence initially. The conversation with the entities took precedence over external stimuli, suggesting his consciousness was operating on a different level entirely. Only after several attempts did he respond to her efforts to rouse him, emerging from the interaction with limited memory of what had transpired. His fundamental understanding of reality underwent complete reconstruction during this period. The materialist worldview that had guided his academic career dissolved entirely, replaced by recognition that consciousness operated through mechanisms science hadn't yet discovered. The certainty he had once felt about the nature of existence evaporated, forcing him to rebuild his philosophical foundation from scratch. The emotional processing that accompanied this worldview collapse manifested in unexpected ways. Masters experienced periods of uncontrollable crying, similar to what had occurred after the conference download. Many experiencers report similar post-contact emotional release, suggesting these responses represent necessary psychological processing of encounters that exceed normal human parameters. Research into contactee experiences revealed that Masters' symptoms matched patterns reported by others who claimed similar encounters. The sleep pattern changes, time distortions, psychic abilities, and emotional releases represented common responses to contact rather than unique personal reaction. This consistency across different experiencers suggested systematic effects rather than individual psychological responses. Masters gradually recognized these new capabilities as tools for understanding rather than random side effects of contact. The out-of-body experiences allowed him to gather information from perspectives impossible through normal consciousness. The telepathic abilities provided direct communication channels with the entities. The altered sleep patterns created optimal conditions for receiving information during receptive states. The ripple effects of the conference encounter continued expanding throughout his daily life. Each new ability and altered state contributed to his growing comprehension of the entity's nature and intentions. The changes weren't random alterations to his consciousness, but rather systematic enhancements designed to facilitate communication and understanding between human and non-human intelligence. As these physiological and psychological changes stabilized, Masters found himself compelled to examine the broader implications of his experiences. The consistency of his encounters, combined with similar reports from other experiencers, suggested patterns that transcended individual contact events. His background in biological anthropology provided unique tools for analyzing what these patterns might reveal about the entity's true origins and nature. The science behind the impossible. Masters began recognizing patterns across thousands of encounter reports that revealed something extraordinary about the being's origins. The consistency wasn't random distribution, but rather suggested organized visitation from multiple time periods. Different witness accounts described entities with varying characteristics, yet all fell within predictable evolutionary trajectories that his anthropological training allowed him to map. The evidence pointed toward not one future human civilization making contact, but several distinct groups from different points along humanity's temporal development. His biological anthropology background provided unique insight into the physical descriptions consistently reported by witnesses worldwide. The beings matched established trends in human cranial development with remarkable precision. Large heads, expanded brain capacity, reduced facial features, diminished body hair, and altered proportions aligned perfectly with evolutionary trajectories observable in the fossil record. These weren't alien characteristics, but rather logical extensions of changes already documented in human development. The cranial evolution patterns Masters studied showed consistent expansion of brain capacity over the past 160,000 years of human development. Modern humans possess significantly larger skulls than earlier hominid species, with pronounced changes in forehead prominence, jaw reduction, and overall skull shape. Extrapolating these documented trends forward produces beings remarkably similar to witness descriptions of gray entities encountered during close contact experiences. Time frame for such dramatic evolutionary changes presents the most compelling aspect of Masters' analysis. Natural human evolution typically requires hundreds of thousands of years to produce significant anatomical modifications. However, the characteristics described by witnesses could realistically develop within 50,000 to 70,000 years if evolutionary pressures intensified or technological intervention accelerated the process beyond natural selection timelines. Genetic modification programs offer the most plausible mechanism for achieving such rapid human development within the proposed timeframe. Current genetic engineering capabilities already demonstrate potential for altering fundamental human characteristics, including brain development, physical proportions, and sensory capabilities. Future civilizations with vastly superior genetic manipulation technology could produce the anatomical changes described in encounter reports within relatively brief evolutionary periods. The biological plausibility of reported entity characteristics becomes more convincing when examined through advanced genetic modification possibilities. Large eyes optimized for low-light environments, reduced digestive systems suggesting alternative nutrition methods, enhanced cranial capacity for expanded cognitive function, and streamlined body structures for technological integration all represent achievable modifications using sufficiently advanced biotechnology. These beings might not represent naturally evolved humans, but rather technological creations designed for specific purposes. The concept of biological drones or avatars explains many anomalous characteristics reported during encounters. Future humans could construct these entities using advanced biotechnology, creating specialized forms optimized for time travel, environmental adaptation, or interaction with primitive civilizations like our own. The Avatar hypothesis addresses several puzzling aspects of encounter reports. Witnesses often describe entities with seemingly artificial characteristics, limited emotional expression, and behavior patterns suggesting remote control rather than independent consciousness. These observations align perfectly with the concept of technologically created biological forms operated by future human intelligence from temporal distances. Time manipulation capabilities represent the most speculative yet crucial component of Master's hypothesis. The physics of time travel remain theoretical within current scientific understanding, yet several proposed mechanisms could explain the phenomena associated with UFO encounters. The most promising involves manipulation of spacetime geometry around traveling craft, creating localized temporal distortions that enable movement through time rather than just space. The spacetime bubble theory provides a framework for understanding both UFO propulsion characteristics and time travel capabilities. By generating controlled gravitational fields around their craft, future humans could create regions where normal physics become suspended. Within these bubbles, conventional limitations on acceleration, direction changes, and temporal positioning might not apply, explaining the impossible flight characteristics consistently reported by witnesses. The information implantation procedures described by contactees follow consistent patterns that suggest standardized protocols rather than random interactions. The entities proposed implanting 3 pieces of information directly into Master's subconscious, using methods that bypass normal memory formation processes. Witness statements describe synchronized memory gaps that match other global cases, indicating systematic approaches to consciousness modification. Masters retained access to only one fragment from his entire download experience, the image of a brown building. Multiple contactees reported a single innocuous memory fragment persisting after contact, according to recent case study compilations used in Masters research. This selective accessibility suggests sophisticated control over human memory systems, allowing entities to determine precisely what information remains consciously available. A 2024 study of long-term contact experiences found that over 70% of experiencers lost conscious recall of core content immediately following implantation. The consistency of this memory blocking across different contactees indicates systematic procedures rather than random psychological responses. The entities appear capable of installing information while controlling subsequent access through mechanisms that science doesn't yet understand. The archaeological tourism concept provides logical motivation for future human time travel activities. If temporal manipulation becomes achievable, studying historical periods would represent invaluable scientific opportunities. Future anthropologists, historians, and researchers would have compelling reasons to visit earlier time periods to observe human development, cultural evolution, and pivotal historical moments firsthand. The biorelativity concept addresses temporal perception differences that might exist between current and future humans. Advanced beings could experience time at different rates than contemporary humans, potentially explaining some of the unusual temporal phenomena associated with encounters. Their perception of minutes might correspond to hours in our time frame, creating the time distortions witnesses frequently report. Master's analysis reveals that witness descriptions consistently match evolutionary biology predictions rather than science fiction alien stereotypes. The beings display human-derived characteristics modified by predictable evolutionary pressures and technological enhancement. This consistency across thousands of independent reports from different cultures and time periods suggests real phenomena rather than cultural contamination or psychological projection. The evidence from biological anthropology, evolutionary biology, and technological development trends converges on a conclusion that Masters found impossible to ignore. The beings contacting humans aren't extraterrestrial visitors from distant planets, but rather our own descendants traveling back through time to study their evolutionary origins. This hypothesis gains additional credibility when examined against the unprecedented levels of official disclosure and data collection occurring in recent years. 2025 data points to future humans. Government disclosure reached unprecedented levels in 2025, with New York State alone reporting 66 UAP sightings in the first half of the year, according to the National UFO Reporting Center. The Pentagon's All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office actively seeks secure software platforms to manage their growing caseload while preparing public reporting mechanisms that represent the most transparent approach to the phenomenon in government history. The characteristics described in these 2025 reports align remarkably with Master's future human hypothesis rather than traditional alien encounter narratives. Recent government testimonies consistently described humanoid entities during UAP encounters, moving away from the stereotypical alien descriptions that dominated earlier decades. A 2024 Pentagon report stated there was no evidence that any UAP sighting represented extraterrestrial technology. Yet the encounters continue with beings that witnesses describe as fundamentally human in appearance despite their advanced capabilities. Military personnel documenting these encounters provide some of the most credible testimony supporting the humanoid nature of the entities. A commercial airline passenger reported seeing a metallic sphere positioned directly under their aircraft during flight, maintaining perfect formation without any visible propulsion system. The object's behavior suggested controlled intelligence rather than natural phenomena, yet its proximity to human transportation indicated familiarity with our flight patterns and technology. Pilot testimony from recent webinars reveals the impossible nature of these craft's capabilities. One experienced aviator described an encounter by stating, "It moved exactly like nothing human-made could. The craft demonstrated instantaneous acceleration, right-angle turns at high speed, and complete silence during operation." These characteristics consistently appear across multiple independent witness accounts, suggesting systematic technology rather than random anomalies. The pattern of sightings peaks during April through June, corresponding with warmer months that encourage outdoor observations. This seasonal distribution suggests the entities understand human behavior patterns and optimal timing for contact attempts. The consistency of humanoid descriptions across different geographic regions and witness backgrounds indicates systematic contact rather than random encounters, precisely what would be expected from future humans conducting archaeological research on their own evolutionary past. Genetic research developments in 2025 reveal accelerated human evolutionary changes that support the biological plausibility of Master's hypothesis. Current genetic modification capabilities already demonstrate potential for altering fundamental human characteristics, including brain development and physical proportions. The pace of advancement in biotechnology suggests that within the 50,000 to 70,000 year timeframe Masters proposes, humans could achieve the anatomical modifications consistently described in encounter reports. Global fertility rates continue declining at unprecedented rates, creating conditions that align with reported genetic sampling programs described by contactees. Future humans conducting archaeological research would logically focus on preserving genetic diversity from earlier periods in human development. The emphasis on reproductive biology in many encounter reports makes perfect sense if these beings represent descendants studying their own evolutionary origins while addressing genetic bottlenecks that occurred in their timeline. Archaeological evidence from 2025 reveals similar encounters documented throughout human history, suggesting ongoing temporal research projects spanning millennia. Ancient texts and artifacts increasingly show patterns consistent with time-traveling humans rather than extraterrestrial visitors. The consistency of humanoid descriptions across different cultures and historical periods indicates systematic contact that predates modern UFO phenomena by thousands of years. Technological advances achieved in 2025 mirror many capabilities attributed to UFO phenomena in encounter reports. Quantum computing progress approaches levels sufficient for the complex calculations required for temporal manipulation. Artificial intelligence development follows trajectories that could produce the sophisticated systems necessary for time travel within Master's proposed timeframes. The convergence of these technologies suggests current human development is progressing toward capabilities that could eventually enable the encounters being reported. Consciousness research experienced major breakthroughs in 2025 that support the telepathic communication consistently reported during contact experiences. Scientific understanding of consciousness expansion reveals mechanisms through which direct mind-to-mind communication could function. These discoveries validate the psychological aspects of encounter reports, while providing theoretical frameworks for understanding how future humans might communicate across temporal distances using enhanced consciousness capabilities. Artificial intelligence development in 2025 parallels witness descriptions of biological drones or avatars used during encounters. Advanced AI systems demonstrate capabilities for remote operation and sophisticated behavioral mimicry that match reported characteristics of encounter entities. The concept of future humans creating biological constructs operated by artificial intelligence explains many anomalous aspects of witness testimony, including the seemingly artificial behavior patterns and limited emotional expression often described. The integration of multiple technological advancement areas creates compelling support for the time traveler hypothesis that wasn't available when Masters first proposed his theory. Biotechnology, quantum physics, consciousness research, and artificial intelligence are converging toward capabilities that could realistically produce the phenomena described in encounter reports. This technological convergence suggests we are witnessing demonstrations of human capabilities from our own future, rather than alien technology from distant planets. Space-time manipulation research progresses toward theoretical frameworks that could enable the temporal travel necessary for Masters' hypothesis. Advanced gravitational field control could create localized regions where conventional physics limitations become suspended, explaining both impossible flight characteristics and time travel capabilities. The energy requirements for temporal manipulation appear more feasible than interstellar travel, supporting the future human origin theory over extraterrestrial explanations. The archaeological tourism motivation for temporal travel becomes more compelling as 2025 data reveals the pivotal nature of our current historical period. Future humans would have strong scientific incentives to study this era of rapid technological advancement, environmental change, and consciousness evolution. Our time represents precisely the type of crucial transition period that future archaeologists would prioritize for direct observation and research. Witness testimony patterns in 2025 show increasing sophistication in reported encounters, suggesting contact protocols are evolving as human understanding expands. The beings demonstrate intimate knowledge of human psychology and cultural development that would be natural for future humans, but unlikely for truly alien intelligences. This psychological compatibility supports temporal rather than spatial origins for the contact experiences. The multiplicity of entity types described across different 2025 encounters supports Masters' multiple timeline hypothesis rather than contradicting it. Various future human civilizations from different temporal distances would logically display different evolutionary characteristics and technological capabilities. Earlier future humans might appear more recognizably human, while beings from more distant futures could show more dramatic anatomical modifications achieved through advanced genetic engineering. The 2025 data creates the most compelling case, yet presented for Masters' revolutionary hypothesis that alleged aliens are actually evolved humans visiting from various points in our future. Government disclosure, technological advancement, consciousness research, and encounter pattern analysis all converge on the same conclusion that challenges everything we thought we knew about the UFO phenomenon. Yet the most intriguing evidence for this theory comes not from government reports or technological analysis, but from the people who witnessed Masters' own impossible encounter and struggled to remember what they had seen. The conference witnesses speak. Masters spent months tracking down everyone who had witnessed his extraordinary balcony encounter at the International UFO Congress. Finding these people proved challenging because most conference attendees exchanged minimal contact information, and many seemed reluctant to discuss what they had observed. The search required detective work, following up on partial names, scattered business cards, and fragmented memories from other conference participants who remembered seeing the interaction but couldn't identify the specific witnesses. The fragmented nature of witness memories became apparent immediately during his first follow-up conversation. People who had been present during the encounter struggled to recall basic details about what they had observed. Their recollections contained strange gaps, inconsistencies, and a uniformity of confusion that seemed artificial rather than natural memory decay. Multiple witnesses described feeling like they had watched something significant happen, but couldn't quite grasp what they had seen. Eric, the man who had served as the channeling conduit for the entities, initially claimed no memory of the encounter whatsoever. When Masters contacted him weeks after the conference, Eric responded with genuine bewilderment about the entire experience. He remembered attending the conference and meeting various people, but the specific interaction where he had delivered messages from the entities was completely absent from his conscious recall. The amnesia appeared selective, affecting only the period when he had been used as a communication vessel. The complete nature of Eric's memory gap was particularly striking given his normal recall abilities. He could remember conversations before and after the encounter with perfect clarity, yet the central event had been surgically removed from his awareness. When Masters described what had occurred, Eric listened with the fascination of someone hearing about events involving a different person entirely. The disconnection between his physical participation and conscious memory suggested external manipulation of his awareness. Heidi possessed partial recollections that proved more helpful in reconstructing the complete story. She remembered taking Masters to the VIP room and being present during portions of the encounter, but her memories contained significant holes where crucial events should have been recorded. Her collaboration with Masters in the months following the conference helped fill in details that neither could access individually, creating a more complete picture through their combined fragmented memories. The collaborative reconstruction process revealed how the entities had apparently edited witness memories with surgical precision. Heidi could remember the setup phases of the encounter, but not the information download procedure. She recalled monitoring Masters during the process, but couldn't access details about what she had witnessed. The selective nature of these memory gaps suggested sophisticated control over human consciousness rather than random trauma-induced amnesia. Other conference attendees provided additional confirmation that something extraordinary had occurred, even though their recollections remained frustratingly incomplete. Multiple people remembered seeing Masters engaged in an intense interaction with a stranger on the balcony, but they couldn't recall specific details about the conversation or its duration. The witnesses described feeling like they had observed something important, yet couldn't explain why the experience seemed significant. The blank stares Masters received when attempting to discuss the experience immediately after it occurred revealed the real-time effects of whatever memory manipulation had taken place. People who had been present just hours earlier looked at him with genuine confusion when he referenced the encounter. Their expressions suggested they were trying to access memories that no longer existed in their conscious awareness, creating visible cognitive dissonance as they struggled to recall events they knew they should remember. These psychological defense mechanisms might represent natural human responses to experiences that exceed normal processing capabilities. When confronted with events that challenge fundamental assumptions about reality, the mind may automatically suppress memories to preserve psychological stability. The uniformity of witness amnesia suggested either coordinated psychological defense responses or external manipulation of human memory and perception systems. The pattern of multiple witnesses experiencing selective amnesia about high-strangeness events appears throughout UFO encounter literature. Research into other cases reveals similar instances where multiple people observed extraordinary events yet retained only fragmentary memories afterward. The consistency of this phenomenon across different locations, witnesses, and time periods suggests systematic interference with human memory formation and retention during these encounters. Masters' case demonstrated how entities seemed capable of controlling not just the perception of events as they occurred, but also the subsequent memory formation and storage processes. The witnesses had clearly observed the encounter, as evidenced by their partial recollections and emotional responses, yet access to complete memories had been somehow restricted. This level of consciousness control implied technologies or capabilities far beyond current scientific understanding. The precision of the memory editing suggested the entities could selectively determine what information witnesses would retain versus what would be blocked from conscious access. Heidi remembered her monitoring role, but not the specific content she had observed. Eric participated fully in the channeling process, but retained no awareness of his involvement. Other witnesses saw the interaction, but couldn't process its significance or remember its details. The collaborative effort to reconstruct the complete story required years of patient investigation and cross-referencing of fragmentary witness accounts. Masters worked systematically to contact everyone who had been present, comparing their partial memories and identifying areas where different witnesses could fill in details that others had lost. The process resembled archaeological reconstruction, piecing together a complete picture from scattered fragments. Eric's eventual recovery of his memories provided crucial validation for Masters' account of the channeling experience. Months after their initial conversation, Eric contacted Masters with restored recollections of serving as a communication conduit for non-human intelligences. His detailed memories of the telepathic exchange, the information download procedure, and the entity's messages matched Masters' account with remarkable precision. The witness testimony patterns revealed sophisticated understanding of human psychology by the entities responsible for the encounter. They had apparently calculated exactly how much information each observer could process and retain without causing psychological trauma or premature disclosure of the contact experience. The selective amnesia served protective functions while preserving evidence for later reconstruction when the witnesses were better prepared to handle the implications. The coordination between different witnesses' memory fragments suggested the entities had planned for eventual reconstruction of the complete story. Rather than erasing all evidence of the encounter, they had distributed pieces of the puzzle among multiple observers, ensuring the truth could eventually emerge through collaborative effort. This approach demonstrated long-term planning and sophisticated understanding of human investigative behavior. The collaborative reconstruction ultimately provided more credible validation than individual testimony could have achieved. Multiple independent witnesses corroborating specific details from their fragmented memories created a more compelling case than a single person's complete account would have generated. The entities had apparently structured the memory distribution to maximize eventual credibility while protecting witnesses from immediate psychological overwhelm. As Masters pieced together the complete picture of his conference encounter through witness testimony, he began noticing something unexpected happening in his own consciousness. The information that had been downloaded during that extraordinary balcony meeting wasn't remaining completely hidden after all. The hidden information surfaces. Masters began recognizing subtle changes in his creative processes during the months following the conference download. The rigid academic writing style that had defined his professional work for decades started shifting towards something more fluid and intuitive. When he sat down to write his science fiction novel, something unprecedented happened. His normal conscious control over word selection and narrative structure seemed to dissolve, replaced by information flowing through him rather than from him. Writing sessions occurred in states that felt distinctly different from his usual academic composition process. Masters would sit at his computer intending to work on specific chapters or plot points, only to discover hours later that he had produced content he couldn't remember creating. The material that emerged during these altered states possessed characteristics that seemed beyond his normal creative capabilities, displaying knowledge and perspectives that felt foreign to his conscious mind. Readers who encountered his science fiction work provided feedback that startled Masters with its consistency. Multiple people independently described the book as feeling channeled rather than written, as if the content originated from sources beyond the author's conscious awareness. Several readers specifically used the phrase "channeled from the future," without any prompting from Masters about his download experience or theories about time-traveling entities. The reader responses revealed patterns Masters hadn't consciously recognized in his own work. People identified sections that seemed to contain information about future technological developments, social changes, and consciousness evolution that felt prophetic rather than speculative. The accuracy of these apparently predictive elements in his fiction began convincing Masters that fragments of the downloaded information were indeed surfacing through his creative work. Specific instances of hidden information emergence became apparent during his ongoing research and writing projects. Masters would find himself developing theories or making connections that seemed to come from nowhere, appearing fully formed in his consciousness without the gradual development process typical of academic insight. These sudden understanding bursts felt similar to the information transfer he had experienced during the conference download, suggesting access to stored data. The telepathic abilities that developed after his conference encounter seemed directly connected to accessing the hidden information repository in his mind. During meditation or quiet contemplation, Masters occasionally experienced moments of clarity where complex concepts would suddenly become comprehensible. These insights often related to his research into human evolution and the nature of time, arriving with the same authoritative certainty he had felt during the original download. Masters discovered that altered states of consciousness served as keys for unlocking fragments of the stored information. Deep meditation, the twilight period between sleep and waking, and intense creative focus all seemed to reduce the barriers preventing access to the downloaded data. During these states, he could sometimes sense vast amounts of information hovering just beyond conscious reach, like trying to remember a dream that remained tantalizingly close yet inaccessible. The brown building image that remained consciously accessible from the original download began serving multiple functions in Masters' ongoing experiences. Sometimes the building appeared during meditation sessions, serving as a focal point for deeper states of consciousness. Other times, contemplating the image seemed to trigger access to related information that had been stored beyond conscious awareness, as if the building served as an index or filing system for the hidden data. Masters recognized patterns suggesting the entities maintained ongoing communication with him through subtle influences on his thoughts and research directions. Ideas would occur to him at precisely the moments when he needed them for his work, arriving with timing that seemed too convenient to be coincidental. These perfectly timed insights often came during critical points in his research when he was struggling with complex problems or seeking new directions for investigation. The possibility that information was being released according to predetermined schedules became increasingly apparent as Masters tracked these emergence patterns. Certain concepts and insights seemed to unlock only when he had developed sufficient background knowledge to understand and integrate them properly. The timing suggested sophisticated programming, designed to provide information when he could use it effectively rather than overwhelming him with data he wasn't prepared to process. Masters' ongoing research and theoretical development showed clear influences from sources beyond his conscious knowledge base. His understanding of human evolutionary trajectories expanded in directions that seemed to draw from information he couldn't remember acquiring through conventional study. The future human hypothesis evolved with nuances and supporting details that felt like recovered memories rather than original theoretical development. The scientific accuracy of insights that emerged during his creative and research work provided additional evidence that the downloaded information was real rather than psychological phenomenon. Masters found himself understanding complex concepts in physics, consciousness studies, and evolutionary biology that exceeded his formal training in these areas. The knowledge arrived complete and internally consistent, suggesting external sources rather than subconscious synthesis of previously learned material. Moments of direct communication with the entities continued occurring sporadically, usually during meditation or altered states of consciousness. Masters would suddenly sense their presence and receive brief telepathic messages or confirmations about his work and research direction. These contacts felt distinctly different from his own thoughts, arriving with characteristics that identified them as external communications rather than internal insights. The entities seemed particularly interested in Masters' progress integrating the downloaded information with his academic research. During these brief contacts, they would sometimes provide encouragement about specific research directions or subtle corrections to theoretical developments that were heading in wrong directions. The guidance felt designed to help him access and properly utilize the stored information rather than providing new data. Masters began suspecting that his role as a bridge between scientific materialism and contact phenomena was central to the entity's agenda. The downloaded information seemed designed to help him develop credible academic frameworks for understanding time travel, consciousness expansion, and human evolutionary potential. His unique position as a biological anthropologist with direct contact experience made him ideally suited for this translation function. The release mechanism governing information access appeared calibrated to his professional development and public readiness for his conclusions. As Masters became more comfortable discussing his experiences publicly, additional fragments of the downloaded data became accessible. The correlation between his willingness to share his story and his access to hidden information suggested the entities were preparing him for a specific role in disclosure. The remaining two pieces of information from the original download continued existing beyond Masters' conscious reach, though he occasionally sensed their presence during deep meditative states. The inaccessibility of this material felt deliberate rather than accidental, as if the information was being held in reserve for future circumstances that hadn't yet arrived. The selective accessibility suggested sophisticated control over both storage and retrieval processes. Masters recognized that his creative work, research insights, and ongoing contact experiences were all connected to the systematic emergence of the downloaded information. The entities had apparently designed a comprehensive program for gradually releasing data as he developed the knowledge base and public platform necessary to share their messages effectively. The Brown Building remained his only conscious link to a vast information repository that was slowly reshaping his understanding of human potential and temporal reality. As Masters continued documenting these patterns of information emergence, he began noticing something that extended far beyond his personal experience. The phenomenon wasn't isolated to his individual encounters.